Welcome to this, the first in a series of 5 lectures about Of Mice and Men. The plan is to go through Of Mice and Men chronologically through the novella and to deal with some of the themes as and when they come up within the story. So I've titled Lecture 1, A Corrupted Eden, introducing the setting, and we'll be focusing mainly on the first part, the first section of the novella, and thinking about how Steinbeck creates a vivid sense of setting and what that's meant to tell us about the story that is about to unfold. So, on first glance, the setting of Mice and Men may seem like an idyllic utopia, a sort of paradise on the surface, a Garden of Eden. Woody Guthrie, that's him on the right there, in his song Do Re Mi, sings, "California is a Garden of Eden, a paradise to live in or see." It's here, as the biblical story goes, in this very good creation, that Adam and Eve commit the first sin and are cast out indefinitely into the barren wilderness. In Genesis, the first book of the Bible, God says to Adam, "Cursed is the ground because of you. Through painful toil you will eat food from it all the days of your life." This Edenic curse, that work will be hard, is ultimately what George and Lennie and countless other nomadic workers in 1930s America must succumb to. They must resign themselves to painful toil all the days of their lives. For Steinbeck leaves us with little to hold on to in the way of hope and optimism, except perhaps the unique and startling relationship that George and Lennie possess. But on the surface, this is a paradise. That's clear from the first setting description. It's a place of prosperity and opportunity, and we'll see that in a little bit more depth in a second. California wasn't called the Golden State for nothing. It was a place where people could hope and dream of a better future. But it is harsh and unforgiving beneath. In Guthrie's song, he says, "Now the police at the port of entry say, your number 14,000 for today." Thousands of people. There's been mass displacement across the southern states of America because of the Dust Bowl, because of the Great Depression. There's much unemployment, much hardship. And the situation that we find ourselves in at the beginning of Mice and Men is just one snapshot in a much broader social upheaval. So while it's a paradise on the surface, it is harsh and unforgiving beneath. We're going to look at those two things in turn. I've made them green and red for a reason, so that as we go through, we can track through those things as we look at a couple of passages from the beginning of the novella. So a paradise on the surface. Initially here in the opening paragraph, where Steinbeck introduces us to the river, we see an abundance of life, which I've highlighted in green. It is an excessive description, almost painting-like, with the branches that arch over the pool. This is like some sort of religious artwork. The water nourishes its surroundings. We see a green bank and willows fresh and green, and the pool is the centre of all animal activity. This is where they come to quench a thirst or rest a while, much like George and Lennie at the beginning of this story. George says, "We're going to sleep here because I got a reason." Is this safe haven, far away from the dangers of the real world, a place where George can, for just a moment, forget about his troubles and live in a dream world with rabbits and chickens and the freedom of his own ranch? Crucially, though, a harsh and unforgiving landscape lurks under the surface. Notice what Anna Loftus says here. In the first scene by the river, Steinbeck introduces the mute evidence of the past, the ash pile left by previous campers, and the tree limb overhanging the water worn smooth by tramps who have come there over the years to jungle up. So this is a harsh and unforgiving place. With all the promise of opportunity and nourishment, there is a sense of dissatisfaction and struggle that remains. We see this perhaps most clearly in the next 2 paragraphs of the novella. An early title of the novella was Something That Happened, and this is perhaps what Steinbeck means to capture here through his description of the setting. This is not something of cosmic significance. George and Lennie's existence is merely one blot on the map of mankind. Look, this is a path beaten hard by boys, and beaten hard by tramps. The repetition is striking. This is not an undisturbed utopia enjoyed only by nature, as we perhaps first thought. Instead, it is a place of continual disturbance, corrupted by the mass displacement of people across the southern states in America. Notice how the limb is worn smooth by men. George and Lennie, for all their unusual qualities, are part of a larger body of men, all of whom battle with the same daily struggles for survival. In a way, they are everymen, created out of Steinbeck's need to represent a universal condition, that of the displaced migrant worker. And so they fit into a microcosm of society at the time. Steinbeck, in this opening passage, broadens and then narrows our vision of this place. We begin with the vast, sweeping descriptions of the wider landscape, like the strong and rocky Gabilan Mountains, a sure sign that the harsh and unforgiving world is not far away. But he zooms in on this quiet utopia, a small area that itself is not immune from the effects of the wider world. In fact, even here are the little hints at the world out there, like the adverbial phrase, from the direction of the state highway. This is our first impression. We can hear George and Lennie's footsteps. They do not exist simply within this snapshot of a setting. They are nomads drifting across America, living on the road and seeking work like everybody else. They fit into a bigger picture. So, there are subtle hints in this early depiction of the setting by the river that their way of life promises nothing but disappointment and dissatisfaction. But at least here they are safe and content in their dream. They fall asleep in harmony after all, having resolved in an earlier dispute, dreaming of a future together in a ranch they own themselves. But the title of this first lecture is not an undisturbed contentment. It is a corrupted Eden. We saw earlier the signs of paradise, the opportunity and abundant life that California had to offer. But lurking under the surface is the inevitability of corruption. There are two Edens at play in this novel. First, the literal Eden, the landscape of actual California, full of hope and beauty and nourishment and life. And second, the American Eden, the American dream, that unattainable ideal that each individual strives to achieve in his or her life. Even George's surname is Milton, which is perhaps an allusion to Milton's Paradise Lost. And the desperate and futile dream that George and Lennie cling to is just that, isn't it? Lost. Of course, a snake appears later in the chapter when it slips along on the pool, its head held up like a little periscope. It is constantly on the lookout, like the serpent in the Genesis story, ready to tempt, ready to deceive and destruct, ready to corrupt George and Lennie's chances at attaining happiness. Finally, it might also be worth asking whether Steinbeck points us towards a broader social truth. Does Of Mice and Men highlight how a world in which people are evil and selfish makes companionship and connection impossible? Mutual endeavour, social intimacy and cooperation do not fit with this post-Eden world, this world of evil. The town itself, Soledad, translates as loneliness in Spanish. And throughout the novel we see it crop up again and again, even in the card game the men on the ranch play, Solitaire. But in this opening section, are the men condemned to a life of solitude? Certainly the signs of a transient and unconnected lifestyle are here. The remains of ash made by many fires show us how warmth is temporary. Soon our lives will be uprooted. We will be cast out, banished, back into the cold and unforgiving world. So is the world of Mice and Men simply a microcosm of 1930s America, or is it our world?